Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center and the Mexico Institute and our program, Diálogos con Mexico, Dialogues with Mexico, that we host regularly as a space for learning about and hearing about key and important issues in Mexico. And we're delighted today to be co-sponsoring this event with Univision TV, who's live streaming this on their English language service. There are other people watching us on the internet this afternoon. The Woodrow Wilson Center is also live streaming, and other news media here as well. So welcome, all of you. I'm particularly delighted to be co-hosting this, co-organizing this with my friend and colleague Lázaro Cárdenas Batel, who co-sponsors the Diálogos con México series here at the Mexico Institute. Thank you for your kind support. There are many distinguished guests here. I don't want to take a lot of time away from our program, but bienvenidos todos. Thank you all for being with us today. We are delighted, as I say, to co-sponsor this event today with Univision TV, the fifth largest network in the United States, and a partner on this program, and we hope for many more in the future. We are especially thrilled that a good friend and colleague, Leon Krauss, has agreed to moderate our session this afternoon. Leon is an anchor at Univision's KMEX 34 TV in Los Angeles. He's also a well-known journalist, radio personality. He's had his own radio show in Mexico City for a long time, appeared on TV, a columnist for El País newspaper, and Milenio, and others, a well-regarded journalist in Mexico, and I should say also a sports historian who has written the definitive book on the Cruz Azul's soccer team, right? That's the important stuff. He's going to help facilitate our discussion today on Mexico's 2012 presidential election and the nation's role in the world. We are delighted to have with us the three representatives from the major campaigns in Mexico. I will just introduce them very briefly. There's bios for each of them out on the table when you come in. I'll just start in order here. To my left is Ambassador Rubén Beltrán Guerrero, a longtime member of Mexico's Foreign Service. He left his post recently there as the Undersecretary of State for Latin America and the Caribbean, and is now the international coordinator for the presidential campaign of Josefina Vázquez Mota. He's been a consul general in New York, Los Angeles, and Phoenix, and so we're delighted to have him here as well. Just to his left is Mr. Emilio Lozoya Austin, also a distinguished internationalist, having been the director of the World Economic Forum for Latin America, also an investment officer at the International Investment Corporation at the IDB. He is the International Affairs Coordinator for the presidential campaign of Enrique Peña Nieto. So welcome, Emilio. Thank you. And last but not least, on our left here is Ambassador Jorge Eduardo Navarrete Lopez, also a distinguished diplomat in the Foreign Service of Mexico. He's been ambassador in numerous countries, represented Mexico in England, in Brazil, in Chile, at the United Nations, and many others. So he has a wealth of experience in diplomacy, and he's here now today to speak on behalf of the presidential campaign of Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador. So we're delighted to have you all here with us today. This is not a debate. This is a discussion that Leon will facilitate for us, and we will have some time at the very end, a few minutes for some questions from the audience as well, which is part of our tradition here at the Wilson Center. So thank you very much, Leon. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here. It's a pleasure for me to moderate this discussion among the foreign policy representatives of the main three candidates to the presidency of Mexico. We live in interesting and challenging times. For Mexico, 2012 is a time of opportunity and great potential. That will also be the case for the next president of our country. In his or her relationship with the United States, for example, Mexico's next president will have a precious opportunity. He or her will begin his or her term at the same time that if Barack Obama is re-elected, the President of the United States will begin his second term, one in which he will have more freedom to further his own agenda and, one wishes, the bilateral agenda as well. We know this not only because of basic political logic, but because President Obama said so himself in a quite peculiar manner to Mr. Dmitry Medvedev a few months ago, as you might recall. So the potential for change, for true reform, will be there, like it hasn't been in a long, long time. But first, Mexico has to decide what its place will be in this interconnected, horizontal, challenging world. Will Mexico embrace its unique set of virtues, its unmatched geographical position, its natural resources, its capacity for production and even consumption, its potential clout as a world decision maker, as one of the most powerful economies in the world? Will it see itself as a player in the world stage, or will Mexico much rather prefer to recede into a secondary role, more that of an island and a player in the competitive world stage? Or as Pink Floyd would put it, and one should always quote the classics in these occasions, will it prefer a walk-on part in a war to a lead role in a cage? That's precisely what we're here to discuss. But let me bring the discussion to Washington. When I asked Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador how he would further Mexico's agenda in the United States in a recent interview, faced with Republican anti-immigrant rhetoric and the NRA and whatnot, Mr. Lopez Obrador told me, and he said so in the debate as well, he said, I would convince them. I would want someone to explain to me what convincing means, not only for the candidate of the left, but for your candidates as well. How would you convince a very divided and polarized body politic that this country has right now when it comes to our bilateral agenda? Yeah. Since I referred to Mr. Lopez Obrador, Ambassador, go ahead.
Yes. In that context, convince means to try that the other side, which is in the same side of the table anyway, will look to the advantages of doing things differently and in a way that it's mutually convenient for both countries. For instance, this very last decision of President Obama in relation to stop for a while deporting young people that came to this country illegally but has remained here for a long time, behaving in an impeccable manner. Mm-hmm. It's a showing that he is convinced of certain of the arguments about a more positive, a more open migration policy and migration parties, despite the fact that the question is very much debated. So convincing means trying to see that the other side looks a little bit the way you look at things, because you explain and give elements to underline the commonality of advantages that could be gained in that way.
I would not attempt to tell how Mr. Lopez Obrador maybe will address that question, but I would like to say something. Rather than convincing, I said that the role of Mexico, Mexico is very well positioned to create or to try to foster a conducive environment within the United States in order for the United States Congress and local authorities to get more acquainted with the Mexican reality and moreover with the impact of the neighborhood. How important is the neighborhood of Mexico for their own economies, how the exports to Mexico are creating a lot of jobs here in the United States. And for that, you can create strategic alliances locally with churches, with unions, with the private sector, and other like-minded organizations, also with progressive governments, because you have to act not only within the belt. I assume that Ambassador is referring to actions within the belt, but outside the belt as well.
But if that's the case, then we have probably failed, because in public opinions in the United States, for example, a law like the crazy Arizona law is quite popular.
Well, you are referring to what we're going to do, not what we had happened in the past. I'm talking about the platform Josefina Vázquez Mota. I'm looking forward. And what I'm saying is, for instance, in the case of Arizona, I think the consuls should go outside their cocoons and try to be more active. And in general, our strategy should be not only, as I said, not only within the belt, but also locally. We have to work locally with the private sector, with basic actors and important actors, like-minded organizations, in order to create that conducive environment with the private sector, for instance. Create more jobs here in the United States and in Mexico. I think it's an agenda of opportunity that we should expand.
We believe that we will have to look for more coincidences. And if I can think of one that Mexico and the U.S. share, it's a lack of jobs. If you can agree with policymakers on both sides of the border of something is on this problem. This has created, significant insecurity problems on our side, as you know. So let's look for solutions on that. That will help us at the same. I'm not saying that we're not going to look into the immigration problem. We're going to continue to look into it, in particular to the human rights aspect. But we have two parts of our economic program that aim to create better economic conditions in Mexico, but that will create jobs on this side of the border as well. One is the energy reform. As you know, with the Shale Gas, I would say, revolution in the U.S., even the geopolitics might change in the next 5 to 10 years. This country might become energy independent in 10 years. Mexico is sitting in the exact significant potential. We need to develop this and deep water oil for our own purpose, for the good of the Mexican families and our society. But you're looking at a new strategic regional security agenda on the energy front. This can create jobs on both sides of the border. Infrastructure, this is another key aspect. Not only on the border, which would lower the cost of trade, which is still important, and we know it is a problem. But with the PPP law that has been passed at the federal level, infrastructure on different aspects, not only on physical infrastructure, but even social infrastructure, could be created. And here, it's a win-win situation. And what I'm talking about is to go from one or two topics on our agenda, meaning security and immigration, to broaden it to a more interesting agenda for policymakers. No one in the U.S. is going to tell you that the two topics that I mentioned are going to affect them. And I believe that will give us also a better economic growth rate in Mexico, that will create jobs, and it will make an immigration reform as well easier.
Now that you have gone into the subject of energy, I want to mention what Ambassador Sarukan, who is highly regarded here in Washington, and I will ask you something about him as well, described as a very clear area of opportunity for our countries, which is obviously energy production. Turns out that if it worked together, North America could have more resources than Saudi Arabia. How would each of your candidates work to reach that potential? Obviously, the question is, should Pemex, Mexico's untouchable goddess, as President Lula calls it, open up?
I can start by saying yes. I don't want to be monopolizing here the conversation. We have, Enrique Peña has advocated for a reform that is not a privatization of the sector, but that allows for private sector investment into a joint venture development of different gas fields or alternative energies or oil. We see that potential, and indeed, these are private sector estimates. I'll give you a very clear example. Today, the U.S., in particular Texas, is producing gas at $2 a unit or BTU. Mexico is exporting it from Indonesia at $8 BTU. Mm-hmm. I mean, if that is not an oxymoron, and you just need to build a pipeline to import it, and if you plug that into the Mexican manufacturing sector, that would make us tremendously competitive. We are also sitting on the 4th or 5th largest shale gas deposits in the world, but we plan to develop those. We
need reform for that.
Yes, indeed, and we hope that together with the other parties we will agree on that. I believe I see coincidences with some political actors, and this Enrique Peña has expressed as its key and most prioritized item on the agenda.
Well, the short answer will be no. There will be, in a Lopez Obrador government, no opening for private investment in the Mexican oil sector. But that doesn't mean that the energy sector as a whole won't change significantly. We will focus any development in the energy sector in very close connection with the demands and the needs of the environment. Now everybody is very much happy with the new shale gas resources. Probably most of those resources won't be used because of the immense environmental cost of extracting the gas and because of the effects of using it in terms of global warming. Probably before shale gas is fully developed, the world will be over the era of fossil fuels and moving rapidly, in a long term, of course, towards other forms of energy. We know certainly that cooperation in the energy sector will be one of the key elements of long-term economic, technological, and financial cooperation between Mexico and the United States. But we will focus more on the renewables, on the new technologies, on the way that the United States is already cooperating, for instance, with China in solar energy, to move in that direction, which is the direction of the future. The oil will continue to be important, particularly for Mexico's domestic development. We will devote most of our oil resources to attend domestic needs, to be refined and otherwise transformed in Mexico, and we will correct this orientation too much gear to export oil in a situation in which our own reserves are diminishing. We can manage a very efficient state oil company, a state oil organism, if we manage to first locate and acquire the adequate technology, and if we manage to stamp out corruption, that is one of the major problems in Pemex.
Ambassador, just to be clear, then in a Lopez Obrador government, for environmental reasons, Mexico would not exploit its shale gas reserves?
I suppose nobody can answer that question in this moment. In this moment, you have technological restraints or constraints to exploit the shale reserves. You have legal restraints that you need to, in any case, reform first. And third, the shale gas resources still are not, in our view, in a position to be counted as other important energy resources because of environmental concerns.
I think your position is needed.
Strikingly different. I would say the following. On the other hand, there are three aspects that we have to consider. On the one hand, what the economists call the cost of opportunity. You sit in this wealth for a long time, you're really losing the game. You cannot just sit in this wealth, being shale gas or oil, and just do nothing about it because you don't have the technology, you don't have the resources, or you have legal constraints. So you have to really address that issue and see what's better for the nation. And to try to isolate Mexico to the international trend to open up the exploitation of oil and energy, all kinds of energy reserves, I think it would be short-sighted in my view. On the other hand, nothing is telling us that you cannot really tackle the issue and go for oil and go for your shale gas and not doing something in terms of going for the renewable sources of energy. You can do both, provided that you really unleash the private sector and you are willing to take some risk and the private sector join you in this kind of effort, pretty much as happening around the world. And in terms of the legal constraints, well, I would like to once again make a point in terms of how favorable it would be to have a coalition government that will give you the muscle you need in the Congress in order to come up with some changes that you need to introduce in the legal framework. So I think we have to move forward. We have to open up. We have to tackle both the wealth that we're sitting on, and we have to go for renewable sources of energy. You can do it simultaneously, and you have to move forward and try to do something for the interesting of your country, not just thinking this taboo of oil is only for the state, not only for the people, it's for the state wealth. Thank you.
Since time is limited, I and probably we'll have some more questions on the economy further on, I would like to switch gears and talk about the drug war. Some voices in Washington, respected voices, seem to fear that some of the current candidates will not continue to pursue President Calderon's aggressive drug war. Senator McCain has even suggested that one of the candidates simply would change course. The consensus in Washington is that he was referring to Enrique Peña Nieto. Mr. Lozoya, would your candidate change course? How so?
Well, we have clearly stated that we are going to take the fight, in general, security policy, we will isolate it from political cycles. Our idea of a security policy is that it should be a state policy. And it is that simple. It should not be an issue of the PRI, the PRD, or the PAN. And, there has been even at the municipal or state or federal level kind of like a competition of who gets the drug lord or who catches some. I mean, this is absurd in a country that is facing such a violence. And the way to change that is to elevate that at a state level and bring all the political actors behind a policy that will bring results. I mean, if you look at the results of the last years, I will share some with you, according to the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index, which is an index that a lot of foreign investors look at. In 2006, it rated the security aspect at 96 out of 136 countries. Then the sample expanded a little bit. Today, in 2012, we're at level 139. At the bottom of the list, let me tell you another one. The business cost of crime and violence, we went from 107 to 139. Mm-hmm. Clearly, the policy that has been put to place, while we don't question at all the issue of going after organized crime, the issue is about bringing results. Clearly, we don't believe Senator McCain was referring to us, and if at all, we're willing to go to whatever measures we need to take to bring results to people. But I will refer to the last one issue, which is, in our opinion, the best weapon against organized crime are jobs.
Which is the same thing, by the way, that Mr. Lopez Obrador usually says. Give me before I ask the other representatives, give me two concrete things that a Peña Nieto administration would do differently from Calderon administration in security.
Well, first of all, is good politics. The Calderon administration was never able to pass a reform with the help of the governors to unify or to consolidate municipal and state police forces.
The PRI wasn't particularly helpful, you must admit.
It was the politics of the Calderon administration, and the PRI helped the PAN pass the majority of the legislation that it passed. And then the second aspect is a reform of the federal police force in order to consolidate it with what Enrique Peña calls it una gendarmería nacional, which is a more unified or consolidated police force at the federal level that will include 30 to 40,000 of the armed forces, military personnel that is not trained to do civil society work, and that will slowly be included into this Gendarmería Nacional?
Well, the answer would be definitely yes. This administration will continue to work very strongly committed against organized crime. And I would like to state the following. The construction of a national police, which was stated by Josefina Vázquez Mota in her platform, will resort to recruiting people coming from the Army and the Navy. So they will be phasing out of the presence of the Army and the Navy in the cities and the states as soon as you have the national police moving in. It's not like a strong federal police or federal policing or federal presence will disappear. So there will be always a tremendous engagement. But now there are some things that are happening in Mexico right now that are paving the way, if you will, and will help the presence of a strong national police, some 150,000 strong men and women present in the field. One is a constitutional reform in terms of human rights of the victims and human rights of the detainees. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the rules of engagement that are changing right now. And thirdly, the adoption of the so-called Miranda Mexican provision that will give the detainees the knowledge of the rights when detained. So what's going to happen in Mexico under Josefina Vázquez Mota's administration is going to be a strong presence of the federal national police, but at the same time there will be some shifting in some strategies in order to give more strategic coups to the organized crime in terms of strengthening the money laundering fight, strengthening the ways in which you really securing the assets of the thugs, and in order also for her administration to heed one of the vindication that the Mexican people is asking is to reduce dramatically the bloodshed level that you see in the streets by fighting very strongly with all the strength of the state, the kidnapping, the extortion, and the homicides in Mexico.
Ambassador, we mentioned part of Mr. Lopez Obrador's agenda when it comes to security has to do with economic development. In an interview, he told me, I'd rather have cheap credit from the United States than cheap weapons. Could you explain that to us?
Well, national security needs to be ensured as a major responsibility of every national government, and that will be the case in Mexico in the next administration. Regional security means a lot and new ways of cooperation with other countries in the region to address common challenges to the collective or regional security. For that, we need to have a fresh view on challenges coming from organized crime in the area of the Mexican northern border and also in the area of our southern border. So regional security encompasses both the North American and the Central American and Caribbean areas, and it's a natural field for cooperation to try to address the collective concerns and to obtain the adequate benefits for all. On the particular questions of violence in Mexico, certainly if you manage to have better growth, higher growth, higher number of jobs, and better social conditions, you are at the same time reducing, expanding the opportunities besides criminal activity for a lot of people. And that will be an answer both in the short, medium, and long term, but that not excludes that you need to be very strong in pursuing criminal activity. And it's clear that there is a firm commitment to continue pursuing federal activity, criminal activity. And then, on the question of the use of the army for internal domestic security questions, you need to move step by step, trying to take out the army of an activity that it's not one adequate for this body. But you cannot do that from one day to the other, given all the recent evolution, and given that the fact that you cannot substitute from one day to the other the protection they are providing to the population. So will be a gradual process. And finally, the whole question of narcotics, use and traffic of narcotics, is a question that is being reviewed internationally, and you need to take part in that revision. Our approach initially will be to consider the question of consumption as a public health problem more than a criminal question to be pursued. You need to be very strong in persecution of traffickers that try to engage, particularly the young people, in narcotics consumption. But the consumer as such needs to be rehabilitated, assisted to overcome the habit, and to be dealt with as a question, as I said, of public health, not as a question of police. But then you need to continue pursuing traffic, illegal traffic, and you need to develop in the international community as a whole, through hemispheric or through universal organs, in United Nations, for instance, to develop new criteria and new forms to deal with this question. In 10 to 15 years, the situation could be completely different than it is now.
So, Senator McCain, basically, you should not be worried at all after we've heard these explanations. Let me talk about the cooperation with the United States. Should Mexico limit its cooperation with the United States with regard to intelligence, or should we move closer to something similar to a Plan Colombia? How will the cooperation between the United States and Mexico in the matter of security look when your government, your potential hypothetical government, ends in 2018, 2019?
I think that what's lacking here is the engagement of having a clearly North American strategy, and for that matter, maybe a hemispheric strategy that will allow all the actors, the United States, Mexico, and other actors, to have a synchronized strategy, a harmonic strategy that will tackle the several issues of a organized crime, which is transnational, and we really have to work together. And I don't see why Mexico should limit its activity in terms of just intel or technology transfer or training of personnel. I see that we need a more coordinated strategy, but on the other hand, there are some other sources of information and some other sources of training and technology that the world provides to Mexico. We shouldn't limit our actions and our sources of information stemming only from the United States. So, to simplify, we need a North American strategy. We need to work in the multilateral also arena in order to give some more clout to some of our actions in terms of weapons contraband, in order to control and also to tackle the international money laundering. And we have to really create a North American and regional strategy in order to become much more effective.
I certainly believe that we have to be more engaged on the multilateral system in this particular regard, and to be part of a deeper reform and understanding on how to deal with this in the longer term. At the same time, I believe that a North American view on this has to be expanded to more of a America's view. The reality is that we have to do much more with Colombia, Peru, some of the producing countries. together with the United States. And I would tell you that in particular under the administration of Enrique Peña, there would be a tremendous emphasis on Central America. Central America is going through a very difficult situation in terms of its security and its development. And the reality is that Mexico and the U.S. have been very absent in our opinion, or at least we could do much more. Part of this is the issue of intelligence sharing, mistrust, not closer cooperation. I believe that more can be done, and a hemispheric view has to be, or at least those countries in the hemisphere who want to be part of this should take part in it. And with a very clear emphasis on Central America, because there's a lot we can do between Mexico and the U.S., but if we don't cooperate on the Central American issue, we're not going to get anywhere.
Some sort of military help, some sort of for Central America?
Well, I emphasize the need for development. First of all, I mean, talk about a good policy towards Central America is how can you create jobs down there? Talk about energy policy. Talk about electricity. Talk about a gas line towards Central America. And at the same time, because security won't solve the problem, a security policy. Yes, you need a security policy together with the U.S., but also with the producing countries. Central America, at the end, is just seeing the substances and the goods pass through their territory. But I believe that a holistic view to this problem is needed, and certainly limiting sharing of information and equipment is not towards the area or towards the type of direction that we should take.
So cheap credit is important, apparently, when one thinks of Central America, and it's important, development is important.
Well, development is important, but development no longer means official development assistance, which is the concept usually associated with the cheap credit expression. The expression, it's better to have cheap credit than cheap arms, I think is an adequate one, and it's very much a translation of the previous idea of trade and not aid. It's a way to encapsulate a vision of things in which, by the way, my friends agree, first comes development, creation of jobs, and through that way, you can also answer the security challenges.
I'm sure that you...
Can I have a follow-up on this?
Yes.
Yeah, because I would not disagree on the importance of development cooperation for Central America. I think it's one of the strategic areas in which Mexico foreign policy should focus in the future.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you have this cooperation agenda, but you have also to stifle what's happening over there. You have to tackle the bloodshed, what's happening in Central America right now. And there are three areas in which you have to work. You have to work on institution building, you have to work also in the training of personnel, and you have to work on the harmonization of legislation with Central America. Those two areas are key in order for you to be successful in Central America, and does not mean that you are patronizing with them. It's working with them, and also in the short run. And that's also why in our platform you're calling for a development of a national commission for the development of our southern border, because you have really to promote the wealth in the region, but at the same time, as I said, tackle the bloodshed and the criminality is happening right now.
Before we open the floor, two questions, which I think is important. I need to ask you about what's going to happen in less than 2 weeks. In less than 2 weeks, hopefully, we're going to have a clear president of Mexico, a clear winner. Do any of you still see the risk of electoral mismanagement in our country? Will all candidates respect the result of the election?
Well, let me say that the risk is always there. Institutions are not perfect, not in Mexico, not in this country. The risk is not a clear and present danger, to use a more or less famous expression. But you cannot ignore completely that the risk exists only after 6 years, an election that was not clarified to the full extent that would have been desirable to clarify. yes, Lopez Obrador will respect the result of the election. And for the first time, the parties that are postulating him will have a very well established structure of representation in all the polling stations all over the country, and they will be the ones that testify that the votes were taken and counted in an adequate manner.
We are less than 2 weeks away, so I would say it's quite present, this potential danger. You don't see then a clear and present danger for this election that happens in 2 weeks?
No, I don't see a clear and present danger.
Emilio?
How can I react to that? Mexico has one of the most expensive democracies in the world. And there are some historic reasons to that. But at the end, there is a tremendous amount of investment in terms of human capital, institution building, and financial resources that have been put into this. The PRI will respect the result of the IFE, whoever wins. I repeat, whoever wins. I think that as a proud Mexican, someone who believes that we have done some things that we could have done better, but altogether, we're a country that needs to look into the future. And thinking about a political party that doubts about the work of thousands and thousands of people of the Institute, Federal Electoral Institute, I believe that I strongly disagree, and I think that it is a pity to hear this type of comments from a political party.
It really mesmerized me, the idea of creating a parallel kind of observing or watchdog in the country that will give credit to the elections.
Are you meaning that your party will not have representatives in the polling station?
What I'm saying is that the results of the electoral process will not be questioned by Josefina Vázquez Mota, and we completely, without any ambivalence, we respect the results as are called by the Instituto Federal Electoral without any reservation of any other circumstance. What I don't believe is the creation of these parallel institutions. I clearly don't see that happening in my country.
That's not happening.
Those were your words. And what I see that Mexico needs is a success story right now. And I think that it's short-sighted to think about what's happening July the 1st. I have tremendous faith. We have tremendous faith in what's happening in the Instituto Federal Electoral and the results are stemming from the IFE's account. And that is a very strong institution. And I have tremendous pride in what happened in the past and solving a number of problems, in spite of very difficult and close calls that were sanctioned by IFE in the past. And what the success story that Mexico is awaiting is a formula that will give the people a clear-cut knowledge that they have as a good future, and a coalition government, for me, is a formula to go in the future.
I have one last question for you, Emilio, before we open up the floor. The movement 132, the student movement, unparalleled, it came out of Mexico's private universities, clearly a movement against many things for many others, but clearly against Mr. Enrique Peña Nieto. You and I are almost the same age. We are youngish. What lesson?
Younger.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll ask you. What lesson do you personally take out of that student movement as a youngish member of Enrique Peña Nieto's campaign?
Well, first of all, I understand them. I share their concerns. I have lived out of Mexico for the last 10 years, and I have seen the country lose a lot of weight internationally, which is the topic that brings us today together. But in particular, as an investor in my last 4 years, I was running a private equity fund and looking for business opportunities in Mexico. And the reality is that the unemployment in Mexico and the conditions for growth are just not there. So how can you not understand 50% of our population is less than 27 years old. with the growth numbers that I was sharing, it is absolutely normal to understand a movement.
But the movement is against the pre, not the pan.
Well, it's interesting that you say so, because they say that they're not political, and the reality is that we have not been in power for 12 years. But at the same time, Enrique Peña has said it's simple. I will have a dialogue with every single societal group or union whatsoever, and he has done so. So clearly, if they have, or some of this students group have identified themselves against the PRI, well, we will need to deal with it in the case that we win. And ultimately, what we want, and we have advocated for the type of things that they protest, we want to provide jobs, we want to provide conditions for growth, we want to provide for conditions for competitiveness in the different sectors that they are complaining about. We have been the ones that have been advocating for tribunals or courts that give expedited rulings and that take immediate effect in the case of anti-monopolist laws. So we will do our best, and as you say, as a young member, well, I share their concerns. Youngish. I share their concerns, and this is the reason why I'm participating in this process.
Do you want to add anything before we? Then
let's hear our friends.
Questions. Back there, we have a couple.
Hi, Antonieta Cádiz with La Opinión newspaper. I actually have two questions. One is on the TPP. President Obama announced today in Mexico that Mexico was invited to the TPP negotiations, and I was wondering, what do each candidate think about this? Do they support Mexico entrance in these negotiations or not? And second, on immigration. Here in Washington, people say that it may take 5 to 10 years to have immigration reform in this country. So I was wondering, what do each candidate will do to change this scenario in the future?
Yeah. On the one hand, on the TPP, Antonieta, I think it's at present with the situation in Europe, that is going to take at least 4 to 5 years to catch up and recover a little bit. The economic strength of the world is coming from Latin America and Asia. And to expand our economies, talking about Mexico and of the U.S. as well, the only game in town is Asia. So TPP is clearly a great opportunity for Mexico to participate. It's a third-generation trade agreement, and Mexico should join immediately TPP. But not only that, Mexico should also join forces with the United States. We have a North American effort to tackle the Asian market, and also we have just signed the so-called Pacific Alliance with Colombia, Chile, and Peru, in order for us to take advantage also for production sharing with those South American countries. So through this three-pronged strategy, if you will, Mexico will try to take advantage, or should try to take advantage of the growth in Asia. In terms of immigration reform, we certainly are very pleased by the truce, if you will, declared by President Obama recently. And we think that I would say comprehensive reform is still lacking. And when I mentioned before that we should expand or try to recover the full strength of our agenda with the United States, certainly immigration aspects is one of the core issues that we have to regain again and retake with the United States. But in order to do that, I was talking about having an alliance with like-minded organizations and like-minded governments, local governments, in order for the federal government to have the necessary votes in order to pass reform in the United States. So locally, you have to work. You have to work with the unions. You have to work with the churches. You have to work with the NGOs. You have to work with local progressive governments to create what I discussed earlier as a conducive environment in the United States for make more possible having comprehensive reform in the years to come. Thank you for it.
May I add
yes, of course.
One point?
Of course.
TPP will be certainly the major trade agreement, which is not only trade, of course. It encompasses a lot of other things. that Mexico will negotiate after nearly 20 years ago negotiated NAFTA. We will try to negotiate TPP in a way far better than the way we negotiated NAFTA. 20 years after NAFTA, the gap in production and income between United States and Mexico is bigger than before the agreement. So we won't want that happen again to gaps between Mexico and Asia-Pacific countries. We need a good TPP.
Was NAFTA a success, Emilio?
I differ significantly with that reading. I believe that NAFTA, while it could have been done better, it has still provided for hundreds of thousands of jobs, if not millions of jobs. Today, the U.S.-Mexican border sees more than $1 billion of trade going through it. And the reality is that TPP, we want to, as a friend of mine says, we don't want to be invited for dinner, we want to prepare dinner together. and if we are part of the process and can negotiate the process on an equal basis, on an equal footing, it's certainly a very interesting opportunity. At the same time, Mexico has the most uneven trade relationship in the world on a bilateral basis, and this is with China. Out of $50 billion of trade, we have $45 billion deficit. So the TPP wants to sideline China clearly, and I think Mexico needs to be very pragmatic about this. I believe it's not mutually exclusive to look at these two opportunities with a very positive eye.
You want to add anything before?
No.
Yes, yes, sir.
My name is Joe Dukert. I'm a non-resident senior associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Until this Q&A, although regionalism has been mentioned several times, North America has not. By North America, I mean Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. Now, I think personally that the Security and Prosperity Partnership was a good concept, poorly implemented. It died of neglect without even a decent burial. The trilateral summits have been sporadic and have produced relatively little. The three federal legislatures of these countries have never met in a joint meeting. So I would like each of the representatives to suggest how, in what degree, and in what areas we should pursue trilateral approaches in North America by governments.
Well, I, for one, consider that the fact that Canada and Mexico didn't work together better in NAFTA questions and in a whole of other questions more or less related with the North American region, what's a pity. And what's due both to Mexican lack of initiative and interest and to Canadian lack of initiative and interest. Certainly Canada and Mexico working together would have made a better NAFTA. And NAFTA will continue to exist. I do not foresee any situation in which the treaty is denounced by any of the three countries, and we will insist very much and have a bigger Canada commitment and participation if NAFTA approaches to trade, to technical cooperation, to education and cultural exchanges, and so on.
I would like to just add that the North American identity goes much, much beyond NAFTA. And when you're discussing North American identity, which is very much needed in order to be consolidated, you are discussing security, you are discussing ecology, you are discussing other aspects. And I do believe that in the future, in order for the region to be more successful, is to really capture the idea of a North American identity. And it's very important in terms of energy, job creation, not only trade, but security as well and many other issues. I think that North American identity, a strong North American identity, is very much needed, and Josefina Vázquez Mota platform is calling for a strong effort in that direction.
Now this side, yes, sir.
Is there no answer from the third?
I share most of what my colleague has said here. I believe that the integration can be deepened. I think there's some success stories recently, for example, on the immigration front, a global entry program. If you take that as a showcase of how to reduce costs and improve security to the maximum level possible, and if you would apply that to the border issues that you were referring, and both on the southern part, on the Mexican U.S. and in the Canadian one, that would be that would reduce the cost of doing business between our countries significantly. I just mentioned that as an example of things that are simple and have a high impact, and there are plenty that have been shared here on the panel.
Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan McConaughey. I'm from Mexico. Recently graduated from college here in the States. And all of you talked about the need for greater integration in the North America with the United States economically. And you also talked about greater cooperation on security matters, but it seems like there are two conflicting priorities, because since the opening of the Mexican economy and NAFTA, drug flow has increased and weapons flows from the United States towards Mexico has increased. That's why the situation is so acute in Mexico. So I think it's impossible to see greater cooperation on economic terms and greater cooperation on national security. They're conflicting. Eventually, you have to make you have to choose between greater security or greater economic integration.
I read a recent piece published by the Wilson Center in which it says that this choice between economy and security is false. That your position is false. That basically you can do both things. I don't know if you agree. I'm just quoting what I read this morning about that particular thing.
Well, I think the figures are there. See how many weapons flow from Texas and the border states to Mexico. See how many billions of dollars flow either way illegally. One of you said that there is a trade of $1 billion. That's legally, but we're talking about cocaine flow. That's supersedes.
Then let's take your question and ask them about illegal trafficking. Not only money, but arms, people, which is a terrible crisis. What could we do about that part of the big Mexican border enigma?
While I share, I understand your concerns. I believe that they're not mutually exclusive. I refer to this global entry program. It's a program where they will ask. They ask you everything that the U.S. government wants to know about your life, so that you can enter the U.S. within 2-3 minutes. Right? You just go, put your passport in a machine. If you apply that, I repeat that, to goods and services, for me the result of that is increasing security to its maximum. If you would apply that to the containers and the trucks and the merchandise going through the border, that you have to go through a long due diligence process. But ultimately, you will create jobs, right? By contracting information technology that applies this, you will increase security, and you will create prosperity on both sides of the border. And I believe that the more that we get to know each other and the more that we trust each other, the better results we will achieve.
Well, I think that what's important is when you're discussing the border relations, you have to think of a new paradigm. In the 20th century and before the 20th century, in the past, the border was considered the first line of defense. When you apply technology and you apply GPS technology, you think about smart corridors and you think about cyberports and you think about these kind of new technologies. In reality, the border will be your last line of defense because you control the movements through smart corridors in the future. So applying technology And clearly there's a very important path of cooperation between the United States and Mexico to secure that and have these smart corridors between, say, Monterrey to San Antonio, from Guadalajara all the way to Alberta in Canada. Just think about the concept that was put forward when I was Consul General of Mexico in Phoenix, Arizona, the cyberport in Nogales, for instance. This is clearly the way to go, and you can achieve that results only through international cooperation between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And I'm a strong believer of a new border that will be like a membrane, a selective membrane that will allow the pass of illicit flow of persons, illicit flow of goods. And in order for also to tackle the weapons thing, I think we have portrayed maybe, or the NRA, which is one of the most effective lobbyists in the United States, we have portrayed maybe our message in the wrong way, or was twisted somehow, because we are not against, Mexico is not against the Second Amendment. The right to bear arms, it pertains only to the U.S. to decide. But we are against the contraband of weapons, short weapons, large weapons, any kind of weapon. So we have really to work very closely with the United States on that. And we have to convince the American people that Mexico is not against the Second Amendment. We're against the contraband, which is also, by the way, killing innocent people. Thank you.
One thing that could be important probably is to try to convince people here to reinstate the assault weapons ban, no?
Well, that will be probably a little bit difficult. But on the question that was posed, I think that there is no general contradiction, but could be short-term trade-offs in terms of opportunity, in terms of intensity of some measures, in terms of priorities to be overcome in a short period of time. So, yes, we need to cooperate closely to resolve adequately those trade-offs and to maintain the general momentum towards a Mexican-American border that I would say operates as similarly as possible to the American-Canadian border.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is James Shipman. I'm a Washington resident and a lover of Mexico. I travel like 5 times a year. I have a suggestion for the 3 candidates. He or she, whoever's elected, work together, don't cut each other's throats, and you'll have a better country. And I think the United States would appreciate it more if you did. I know we do. I wish the United States candidates would quit cutting each other's throats, and let's run the country, run the world, and peace everywhere.
Thank you. Why don't you bring the microphone over here so we can have a question?
May I say something on that question?
I hope you agree.
No, I do agree. I agree. But moreover, the candidates should remember that the campaign is not like Las Vegas. Whatever you say to the campaigns, do not stay in the campaigns. It goes further. So you have to think about whenever you're declaring something that goes beyond the campaigns.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Patricia Escamilla Ham, National Defense University. I'm a professor. And I would like to highlight that one of the greatest challenges, obstacles to advance against organized crime and to reduce violence is the prevalence of corruption and impunity in Mexico. And I would like to know how each one of the candidates proposes to reduce that problem in Mexico. Thank you.
Well, to fight corruption is one of the top priorities of Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, and also to fight impunity. Having said so, I would say that particularly if you see to the narcotics trade question, you need to accept that sometimes corruption and impunity are not the exclusivity of just one side of the border.
We have proposed anti-corruption czar that is independent, an independent organization that will deal and hear complaints. Today, we know a lot of our court system is penetrated by organized crime. But just in general, I have to. it is a good reflection to accept that the corruption in Mexico has been present in all the three parties at three levels of government, and the reality is that we need to deal with it. And but I share the ambassador's comments that there is a market, and the market is not only Mexico for some of the things that promote organized crimes businesses.
Three very concrete points to your question. Josefina Vázquez Mota has proposed life sentence to corrupt politicians, one, associated with organized crime. Secondly, if you don't give your police a career, this is to say a pension, a good salary, a credit for a house, and funding for the kids in order to be educated, then you don't give them nothing to lose. If you give all these four elements, they will have something to lose. Thus, it will be much more difficult for them to be corrupted. And thirdly, we have a system, I don't know how to call it in English, fuero, which is a legal shield that prevents politicians to be trialed. Josefina Vázquez Mota has promoted that this fuero would be lifted from politicians so they can be trialed.
Last question, sir, please.
Very quickly. Crescencio Arcos from the National Defense University. My question is, often we hear that Mexico and Latin America, for that matter, do not have much attention in this town, and somebody mentioned it earlier here. The fact of the matter is there are sectors in our society in the United States, such as energy and the American-Israeli Political Action Group that support and take positions on the Middle East. Walmart takes positions on Asia. The NGOs, very, very powerful on Africa. And you can go on. But when it comes to Latin America, it looks like the only time we hear anything is from DEA or ICE. And my question is, why hasn't Mexico established a top cover, as we call it in this town? Friends, powerful friends, whether it's in the energy, whether it's in the NGO, whether commercial, whatever sector, to do a lot of its support and lobbying in this town.
A Mexican APAC, you mean? Something
No,
like that.
I'm not suggesting necessarily that, because you're not a state under siege or a captive nation.
But an active lobby.
To promote the Mexican agenda or the Latin American agenda.
Okay.
Well, I'm very glad that you're touching upon that subject, because this is clearly one of the parts of the foreign policy platform of Josefina Vázquez Mota, is to create a public diplomacy office, which is very successful, has been very successful in other countries. The United States, for instance, have an undersecretary within the State Department of Public Diplomacy, on the one hand. That doesn't mean that you have to Photoshop the reality of Mexico through this office, but clearly it's a way to post the right message within different actors in the United States, in the worldwide, in order to see that in Mexico there's much more than a drug against wars or against organized crime or this level of bloodshed in the country. There are so many things about our culture, about our history, about our economy, about how vibrant and important Mexico is. So having a public diplomacy office will also entail that the different actors of the government will put their act together and have a contundent, very much more important message, coordinated message in the world. So public diplomacy, I think, is one of the strategies, not all the strategies, one of the strategies to do precisely what you're saying, to foster a better image of Mexico in the United States and worldwide. Thank you.
I think you hit a very important topic, and what we're proposing is a competitiveness commission that deals from them, because while we believe that the government can do a part of it, having a representation here is, it can be politically, but at the same time, I don't know exactly to what extent the PAN is proposing this. What we're proposing is to bring different sectors from society together to help us carry out a strategy that really services all needs of Mexican society. The private sector has been absent since we signed NAFTA in terms of our foreign policy. It is today it is a key actor in order to, we talked about Asia and we talked about Latin America, and we cannot run in different directions. We need to put our interests together, and we believe there are other cases that have in the world that have put a commission like this, and it works. and it could deal with some of the interests, at least partially, that we should be advocating at the U.S. level. But I believe that would also serve Mexico, look at issues in Latin America and Asia, where you bring NGOs, private sector, and government together.
Ambassador?
Yes, of course, and I think it's very important to underline, and this connects with my first comment this afternoon, is that a great part of the job of convincing Americans, which is not only, of course, the American government, but the American society, that there are commonality of interests that should be pursued, will be through the work of NGOs, of trade unions, of other social organizations, and very much with the assistance of the established Mexican-American communities in this country.
Can I just one quick question?
Sure.
It's a yes and no question. Would each of your candidates invite Ambassador Sarukan to reprise his job as ambassador to the United States? Yes or no? For him to keep being the ambassador to the United States?
I put it this way. I think Arturo has been one of the most successful ambassadors we had in several years, and he will have, no doubt, a very brilliant future in the diplomatic sector.
I'm guessing by your non-verbal communication, my friend, that your answer is no?
I think that, such a decision is a decision of Enrique Peña Nieto and not for me to verbalize here.
I would say more or less the same.
Okay. And that's
All
it.
right,
Thank
please
you,
join me in thanking our special guest, Leo Kraus, for an excellent job moderating. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen.